Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for being here today. It's so wonderful to see you all and familiar faces amongst new friends to be had. So I will begin with the title of my talk, Surprised by Jane Austen, Moments of Beauty in Pride and Prejudice. And I have to let you know that I went to England on a Jane Austen tour, and it was beautiful. I was walking down a lane that was now paved that Jane Austen herself walked down from her house. She had a small little house. It's no longer there. It's a big field in this quiet little village of Steventon. And we walked down the lane to the church that her father was a clergyman for about 30 years. I saw the green grass of the field waving in the wind, and I thought, Jane must have delighted in the dance of that grass. I prayed in that church. It was cold, but I thought, well, Jane also must have been cold in this church. And I was even able to hold the key to the church, this large, rusty iron key. And the tour guide told us that Jane's father, the Reverend Mr. Austen, would hide the key in the now giant yew tree outside of the church. And so I went out to that tree and I kind of scooched under it, and I found what I thought would be the hiding spot for this big iron key. And I imagined Jane, like young Jane, reaching up, grabbing the key, running over to the door of the church, helping her dad unlock it. And again, the beauty overwhelmed my senses as I was awakened to the fact that someone I greatly admired lived here, walked that lane, held the same key, prayed in the same church. Although 250 years separated us, and I'm not living in Regency, England, my father is not an Anglican clergyman, I don't have 6 brothers, but I felt a kinship and a friendship with this woman. As an Austen scholar writes, quote, "Make friends with this quiet but brilliant woman, this superb artist in fiction, and you have made a friend for life." Truly, it was beautiful to walk with my friend Jane. She's been larger than life for me ever since I read Pride and Prejudice back in 8th grade, and I'm sure I have fellow Janeites in the audience. Very good. If you didn't know the term Janeite, it actually comes from a Rudyard Kipling short story about these soldiers, these World War I soldiers in the trenches, talking about their love for Jane. And this other soldier's like, who's this Jane they're talking about? You'll love Jane. It's a great short story. But yes, we Janeites, we can quote from her books, which we've read several times. We have favorite heroes and heroines. We know the best screen adaptations. 1995, yeah, okay. BBC. C.S. Lewis admired Jane Austen. G.K. Chesterton called her a genius. Even Winston Churchill found solace in reading Jane Austen. At the Jane Austen House Museum, I saw an exhibit on Austen mania, a term encapsulating the explosion of Austen fever in the 90s when those film adaptations leapt onto the screen, bringing renewed zeal to Jane, both in terms of academic scholarship and popular fandoms. Austen mania, larger than life, it still continues today. But being on that tour, seeing her small house, her tiny little writing table, her garden, her books, which were small, I found myself surprised by the beauty of these small and ordinary objects. I did not plan to feel a sense of delight when I saw the same wallpaper pattern in her house that she had while living there. I didn't choose to feel awe when I gazed at the books she once held in her hands. Simply seeing them gave me pleasure because I knew they were part of Jane's life. This experience made me think of a poem called The Touch of the Master's Hand by Myra Brooks Welch, which tells of an old, battered violin being sold at an auction. No one wants it until a master violinist picks it up and brings forth a hauntingly beautiful melody which awes everyone. Then they all race to bid for that violin. An experience of beauty changed the audience as they saw the truth that the old violin still had great value, but it took a master's touch. This is the focus I'd like to offer for today's talk. Encounters with beauty surprise and change Austen's characters in Pride and Prejudice, such that they see something new of great value in something familiar and ordinary. In his defense of poetry, but it applies to all great literature, Percy Shelley claims, quote, "Poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were not familiar." The experience of beauty is often something we don't choose. Rather, it's a moment of surprise. We are unexpectedly stopped in our tracks, drawn towards that object, pondering it and seeing it in a new way. We experience pleasure. Thomas Aquinas defines beauty as that which, when seen, pleases. This pleasure occurs, according to Aquinas, when we recognize the goodness of the object's integrity or its wholeness, the harmony or right proportion of its parts, and the clarity or radiance of its being, virtues, and truth. As we meditate upon the integrity, harmony, and radiance of a beautiful being, often a deeper change occurs when we apprehend that the beautiful is, to use Pope St. John Paul II's phrase, the visible form of the good. Since, by nature, we desire the good and will it for ourselves and others, an encounter with beauty can be the motivation towards moral goodness. John Mark Merivale clarifies this point in his book on beauty that, quote, "Beholding beauty can direct our passions, which in turn provide powerful motivators for action towards spiritual goodness and truth." The key word, though, is can. Our initial response to beauty is spontaneous, the surprising movement of our heart, or as James Joyce once clarified it, the enchantment of the heart. And we do not choose to have it, yet as we apprehend the beautiful as good and desire to know it more, our reason moves our will. We can choose to act towards goodness and truth or not. As quoted in Merivale, quote, "The pursuit and promotion of beauty is a crucial aspect of the Christian moral life," end quote. Yet the encounter with beauty does not always lead to moral goodness, nor does a good action, such as marriage, indicate that the choice was motivated by beauty. In Pride and Prejudice, we will look at the examples of Mr. Collins and Lydia Bennett to show how their encounter with the beautiful lacks integrity, harmony, and radiance, and thus fails to motivate them towards moral goodness. Then we will examine the power of beauty as it successfully motivates Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennett towards truth and goodness. So, Mr. Collins. In the early 1800s, when Pride and Prejudice takes place, it was a common practice for a father to leave his inheritance to his sons. However, Mr. Bennett and his wife had 5 daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, Lydia, no sons. Thus, his estate was destined for a male cousin, Mr. Collins. As Austen writes, quote, "Mr. Collins was not a sensible man, and the deficiency of nature had been little assisted by education or society. Yet, having now a good house, very sufficient income, he intended to marry. And in seeking a reconciliation with the Bennett family, he had a wife in view, as he meant to choose one of the daughters, if he found them as handsome and amiable as they were represented by common report. This was his plan of amends, of atonement for inheriting their father's estate, and he thought it an excellent one." End quote. On a surface level, it seems that Mr. Collins is acting towards goodness as motivated by beauty, or at least reports of beauty, to offer his hand in marriage to one of the daughters and to bring a reparation to the family. Yet integrity is missing. We discover that Mr. Collins is primarily motivated to obey his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who said, "Mr. Collins, you must marry." He sees a Bennett daughter as a means to that end. Further failures in harmony and radiance occur when he arrives at the Bennett home. Austen writes of Mr. Collins, quote, "Miss Jane's Bennett lovely face confirmed his views, and for the first evening she was his settled choice. The next morning, however, he made an alteration, for before the morning breakfast, Mrs. Bennett offered the hint that Jane was soon to be engaged to another. So Mr. Collins only had to change from Jane to Elizabeth, and it was soon done while Mrs. Bennett was stirring the fire." End quote. We laugh at the ridiculousness of Mr. Collins, but there is something to pity. Moving from Jane to Elizabeth made no difference to him. Mr. Collins came with a preconceived notion of this reported beauty superficially, and he saw only what he wanted to see. There was no surprise, no change, no enchantment that occurred in Mr. Collins' heart. Most likely it was a result of the lack of sensibility, his deficiency as nature, as Austen had characterized him, and she also depicted him as having, quote, the self-conceit of a weak head. In this description, Austen shows the value of needing to form our minds and our hearts to better help us to receive, to apprehend the beautiful, to see the integrity of the person as a whole being, inseparably material and spiritual. Mr. Collins' marriage proposal to Elizabeth, therefore, is a spectacular failure. Primarily because he doesn't actually see her, and he doesn't listen to her. Indeed, Austen characterizes Mr. Collins as, quote, persevering in willful self-deception. His encounter with the beautiful Bennett daughter fails to move him outside of that self-deception, fails to move him towards a greater good, beyond his vain desire to please his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. The marriage Mr. Collins does accomplish, which is not with Elizabeth, would also not be called a beautiful one in that deeper sense. For Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's friend, she's 27 years old, she decides that marriage to Mr. Collins is better than being a financial burden to her family. So Charlotte subtly, maybe in some manipulation, convinces Mr. Collins, encourages him to offer her a proposal, and she accepts with very practical coolness. But again, we see integrity is lacking. Charlotte is using Mr. Collins as a mean to her end of being the, quote, mistress of my own home. They are not in harmony. In fact, Charlotte plans her schedule such that Mr. Collins is out of her sight for most of the day. Overall, when seeing that marriage, we note its lack of radiance, the lack of beauty that could motivate others towards truth and goodness. And now for Lydia Bennett. Another failure of beauty motivating a person towards truth and goodness occurs with Lydia. She is the youngest of the Bennett daughters. She is concerned only with officers, dancing, and gossip. When a militia regiment is stationed in their local village, Lydia forms rapid acquaintances with several of the red-coated officers, encouraged by her mother, who told her husband, quote, "My dear Mr. Bennett, you must not expect such girls to have the sense of their father and mother. I remember the time when I liked a red coat myself very well, and indeed so I still do at my heart. And if a smart young colonel with 5,000 or 6,000 years should want one of my girls, I shall not say nay to him." Unquote. And one soldier, Mr. Wickham, charms them all. Even Elizabeth Bennet, after an evening spent in the company of Mr. Wickham, quote, went away with her head full of him. Austen writes of Mr. Wickham, quote, "His appearance was greatly in his favor. He had all the best part of beauty, a fine countenance, a good figure, and very pleasing address, as well as a happy readiness for conversation." End quote. Elizabeth is attracted to him. She's excited by the prospect of dancing with him at an upcoming ball. She's disappointed when he does not appear. When Elizabeth's Aunt Gardiner notices Elizabeth's clear preference for Wickham, she cautions her against an imprudent match. Elizabeth replies to her aunt, "He is, beyond all comparison, the most agreeable man I ever saw. But I see the imprudence. I will do my best to discourage him." Although Elizabeth still likes Wickham at that stage in the novel, she recognizes the wisdom of her aunt's advice and chooses not to draw closer to him. Her youngest sister, Lydia, however, makes a different choice. In a shocking turn of events, many chapters later, news reaches Elizabeth when she is away visiting the Lakes region with her aunt and uncle Gardiner, that Lydia has run off with Mr. Wickham. In a letter written to her friend, Lydia said, quote, "You will laugh when you know where I'm gone, and I cannot help laughing myself at your surprise. As soon as I am missed, I am going to Gretna Green, and if you cannot guess with whom, I shall think you a simpleton, for there is but one man in the world I love, and he is an angel. I should never be happy without him." To such a letter, Elizabeth cries, "Oh, thoughtless, thoughtless Lydia." Lydia did not think of anything more than her own feelings and did not see anything more than that surface level beauty of a red uniform and Wickham's charming external manners. She, like Mr. Collins, was not surprised by beauty in a way that changed her for the better. Instead, she makes a selfish choice that leads to moral disgrace, public scandal, and eventually unhappiness. For as Austen writes at the conclusion of the novel, quote, "His affection for her sunk into indifference. Hers lasted a little longer." Lydia did not see that Wickham lacked integrity, that his external surface hid a corrupt interior life. She did not care that he behaved erratically, without harmony, being inconsistent in his words and actions. And she did not realize that his soul lacked the radiance of truth and honesty. Lydia never learned that pursuing moral and spiritual beauty is of far greater value than physical beauty in contributing to our happiness. And so we come to Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennett, our successful example of how an encounter with beauty leads a character towards spiritual goodness, truth, and happiness. Now, when Mr. Darcy first saw Elizabeth, he was not impressed. He tells his friend, Mr. Bingley, who had encouraged Darcy to ask Elizabeth to dance, quote, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men." Yet, only a few chapters after his dismissal of Elizabeth as tolerable, Mr. Darcy soon finds himself undergoing a surprising change. Austen writes, quote, "While she, Elizabeth, observed Mr. Bingley's attention to her sister Jane, Elizabeth was far from suspecting that she herself was becoming an object of some interest in the eyes of his friend. Mr. Darcy had first scarcely allowed her to be pretty. He had looked at her without admiration at the ball, and when they next met, he looked at her only to criticize. But no sooner had he made it clear to himself and his friends that she had hardly a good feature in her face, than he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. To this discovery succeeded some others equally mortifying. Though he had detected with a critical eye more than one failure of perfect symmetry in her form, he was forced to acknowledge, her figure to be light and pleasing, and in spite of his asserting that her manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. He began to wish to know more of her, and as a step towards conversing with her himself, he attended to her conversation with others." End quote. This is a remarkable passage in revealing Austen's understanding of the nature of beauty. Mr. Darcy undergoes an unexpected and surprising response to Elizabeth. He is caught. But the use of the word mortifying is also revelatory of the change occurring in Darcy. He's embarrassed that he has to admit to himself he was wrong in his first perception of her. He's surprised to realize that he can be attracted to someone who had not met his principles of perfection. Austen also uses the word forced to reveal how set Darcy was in his ways, that he had to make a concentrated effort to force himself to admit he could be drawn to someone he had thought beneath his notice. Yet Darcy, unlike Mr. Collins and Lydia, is moved by the surprising change of mind and heart to wonder about Elizabeth as a whole person. He moves from seeing separate elements of her physical beauty, fine eyes, a pleasing figure, to seeing an integrity, harmony, the radiance of her easy, playful manners. Encountering beauty reveals that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This realization of her beauty motivates Darcy towards a good action. He asks her to dance. But Elizabeth refuses. However, Darcy does not think poorly of her, but continues to ponder the mystery of Miss Bennett. Since the beautiful motivates us towards truth, meditating upon it is a pleasure in itself. Mr. Darcy speaks directly to this pleasure when Caroline Bingley, Mr. Bingley's sister, has approached Mr. Darcy, presumed that he is bored by the gathering. Yet he surprisingly claims, quote, "Your conjecture is totally wrong. I assure you, my mind was more agreeably engaged. I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow." The more Darcy encounters Elizabeth, the more he is intrigued. He is challenged by her intelligent conversations. He is impressed by her compassion for his sister. She walked 3 miles in muddy fields to tend to her sister. His attraction towards Elizabeth's physical beauty is surpassed by his wonder at her intellectual and moral beauty. This stimulating change to Darcy's mind and heart leads him to a very bold decision. Only a few months later, Darcy unexpectedly marches into the house where Elizabeth is staying, professes his love and admiration of her, and proposes marriage to her in full confidence that she will accept. To his great astonishment and mortification, she refuses, quite vehemently. And Elizabeth's fierce accusations of his ungentlemanly actions of the past do not please him. He leaves the house quite angry. However, an aspect of the truth in her words and his sense of justice leads Darcy to a moment of clarity. He realizes that although he had been drawn to Elizabeth and moved to orient his thoughts and actions outside of himself and towards her, he had not done so in complete selflessness. Even in his proposal, Mr. Darcy had operated with his habitual pride, thinking most of his own good and not about hers. Mr. Darcy then writes a lengthy letter explaining and justifying his actions. And this letter serves as that source of truth which changes Elizabeth. Austen writes after Elizabeth finishes reading the letter, quote, "Astonishment, apprehension, even horror oppressed her. But after she read and reread the letter with closest attention, she realizes the truth of his words, discovering, 'Till this moment, I never knew myself." In a surprising way, Elizabeth encountered a moment of beauty via the letter by seeing the integrity and harmony of Mr. Darcy's actions. Although not quite radiance of truth, since he did admit to practicing deception at some point. But most of all, the conclusion of his letter is a visible sign of goodness when he writes, quote, "I will only add, God bless you, Fitzwilliam Darcy." Elizabeth undergoes a change because of this letter. She discovers that Mr. Darcy is a man of integrity, that his words and actions are in harmony with his thoughts, and that he has the radiance of his soul in the virtue of seeking justice. Elizabeth's understanding and respect for him grows. Then, while touring the Lakes region with her aunt and uncle Gardner, Elizabeth accidentally, or as I like to tell my students, providentially, bumps into Mr. Darcy at his estate, Pemberley. He was not supposed to be there. And his manner, though initially awkward, becomes graceful and polite to her and her relatives. He acts with a goodness that causes a further change of heart for Elizabeth. And then, finally, when Elizabeth discovers that Darcy was instrumental in saving Lydia, in causing Wickham to marry Lydia, saving them and the Bennett family from additional scandal, she finds herself vastly impressed by his goodness. And, quote, her heart did whisper that he had done it for her. Both Darcy and Elizabeth grow in goodness because of their surprising encounters with the beauty of each other's words and actions. We see proof of this growth when Elizabeth repents of, quote, every ungracious sensation she had ever encouraged, every saucy speech she had ever directed toward him. For herself, she was humbled, but she was proud of him, proud that in a cause of compassion and honor, he had been able to get the better of himself. She read over her aunt's commendation of him again and again. It was hardly enough, but it pleased her. End quote. Now Elizabeth finds pleasure in meditating upon Mr. Darcy, not his fine eyes or his impressive estate, but the beauty of his growth in virtue. In his choices towards his spiritual goodness, he exudes that integrity, that harmony, the radiance. And more beauty appears in Mr. Darcy's second and successful proposal. He asks for forgiveness from Elizabeth. He explains that when he encountered Elizabeth at Pemberley, which was the first time he had seen her since the disastrous marriage proposal, he made every effort to behave in a gentlemanly manner. He admitted to her, quote, "My object then was to show you by every civility that I did not resent the past, but I hoped to obtain your forgiveness." He further confesses, "I have been a selfish being all my life, in practice, though not in principle. As a child, I was taught what was right, but I was not taught to correct my temper. I was given good principles, but left to follow them in pride and conceit. Such I was from 8 to 28, and such I might still have been but for you, dearest, loveliest Elizabeth. What do I not owe you? You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you I was properly humbled. I came to you without a doubt of my reception. You showed me how insufficient were all my pretensions to please a woman worthy of being pleased." End quote. We actually hear the definition of beauty in Darcy's words. Aquinas is that which when seen pleases. John Paul II's beauty is the visible form of the good. And the quote I offer from John Mark Marival's book, "Beholding beauty can direct our passions, which in turn provide powerful motivators for action towards spiritual goodness and truth. We know Darcy and Elizabeth's apprehension of the beauty in each other will continue to motivate them to grow in virtue and thus to achieve happiness. So when reading of their determined effort to grow, we readers experience an excitement in knowing that the end is ordered towards their happiness. We encounter beauty in the book and seeing how they will reach their inevitable happy ending. But as one critic wrote, not much happens in Pride and Prejudice. He said, quote, "A man changed his manners and a woman changed her mind." It's true that not much happens in terms of the dramatic action, such as facing monsters on a quest or fighting battles in a war. This is surprising to critics because Jane Austen lived in an era of great revolutions. She was born in 1775, which makes this her 250th birthday, at a time of the American Revolution. Her cousin's husband, who was a French count, was guillotined in the French Revolution. Her brothers who joined the Navy battled against the threat of Napoleon, and those wars lasted for 15 years of her life, yet she wrote about none of these excitements. Instead, she wrote about the excitement, the beauty, of pursuing virtue. As another Austen scholar wrote, quote, "Jane Austen can get more drama out of morality than most other writers can get from shipwreck, battle, murder, or mayhem." And when Winston Churchill was bedridden with pneumonia during World War II, his daughter read Pride and Prejudice to him. In his memoir, Churchill reflected, quote, "The doctors tried to keep the work away from my bedside, but I defied them. They all kept saying, 'Don't work, don't worry,' to such an extent that I decided to read a novel. I had long ago read Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, and now I would have Pride and Prejudice. My daughter, Sarah, read it to me beautifully from the foot of the bed. What calm lives they had, those people. No worries about the French Revolution or the crashing struggle of the Napoleonic Wars. Only manners controlling natural passion, so far as they could, together with cultured explanations of any mischances." End quote. We hear the surprise in Churchill's words that he enjoyed a book about calm lives. But his comment reveals that reading of calm, ordinary life is just as valuable and pleasurable as reading of the lives of the feats of heroism in the midst of war. Moreover, heroism does occur in the calm lives as well. Elizabeth herself is the perfect example of taking that heroic look into the mirror when she stated, "Till this moment, I never knew myself." She and Mr. Darcy both undergo a spiritual revolution of their souls. That is the kind of revolution Jane Austen writes about. No matter our temperament, family situation, circumstance of history that we find ourselves in, one universal truth always remains. Our happiness depends on the state of our soul, and caring for it lies in our responsibility. This truth is at the core of every Austen novel. As another critic wrote, quote, "Jane Austen's novels are a bulwark against tumultuous change. They deal with a far more important question than who would win the Napoleonic Wars. They're concerned with how to live life well in the peace to follow, which was what the fighting was actually for in the first place." We should go on quests when called, fight an enemy bravely in battle, but most frequently our battles are interior ones, our daily, ordinary, and heroic quests to fight against sin and to will the good of ourselves and others, and beauty can motivate us towards that goal. Overall, Austen's works are beautiful, both in the goodness of her craft and the truth that she reveals, especially the truth that we are ordered towards happiness, and we have a responsibility to choose well in order to achieve that happiness. She shows us through the characters in Pride and Prejudice that the experience of beauty can be a complex situation. We may miss it entirely if we are unformed and unable to see beyond our own preconceived ideas, as was Mr. Collins. We may be caught up only in the physical element of beauty, as was Lydia Bennett, and never realize that the beauty of a virtuous soul is the true cause for our happiness. And we may be turned upside down by our experience of beauty, as was Mr. Darcy, before finally landing on our feet, when we realize that we are responsible for our growth in moral and spiritual goodness, and choosing to act for the good of another does lead to happiness. Most of all, Austen shows us that this endeavor is not a somber or burdensome one, but rather a cause for joy. Laughter abounds on every page of Pride and Prejudice, and we cannot help but rejoice with Elizabeth when she writes to her Aunt Gardiner the happy news of her forthcoming marriage to Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth's joy is tangible when she writes, quote, "I am the happiest creature in the world. Perhaps others have said so before, but no one with such justice. I am happier even than Jane. She only smiles. I laugh. Mr. Darcy sends you all the love in the world that can be spared from me. You are all to come to Pemberley at Christmas. Yours, etc." The happy endings of Austen novels are always a celebration of community. Each good marriage promises not only a growth in virtue, but a growth in communal life. That, after all, is one of the purposes of beauty. The more we encounter it well, the more we grow closer in communion with others and with God. To conclude, G.K. Chesterton once wrote, quote, "Jane Austen was not inflamed or inspired or even moved to be a genius. She simply was a genius. She, by her own artistic talent, made interesting which thousands of similar people would have made dull. There was nothing in her circumstances or even in her materials that seems meant for the making of such an artist." End quote. Like Chesterton, I too was surprised by Jane Austen, as I saw new beauty in an author and works that I had been reading for years. During that tour in England, I was every day surprised by her, seeing the tangible, ordinary objects, apprehending that integrity, the harmony, the radiance of her life. They were moments of beauty and joy. It was the experience of those in the audience, in the poem, when the old violin received new value because of the master's touch. The genius Jane Austen had was the master's touch. She showed us the beauty of our lives lies in the goodness of our souls. A goodness which primarily comes with loving ourselves and others well, and finding joy in the ordinary moments of our daily lives. Reading Jane Austen reminds us that encountering beauty can motivate us to seek the truth, choose the good, and thus bring joy to the heart of man. Thank you.